Hey, what's up? This is Zach here at the GM podcast in Bangkok, Thailand with Ryan. Super excited to be chatting today. How are you doing?
Man, I'm doing great. It's been an invigorating week. Running around, heat, traffic, meetings, crypto pumps. It's been a really good time.
Yeah, that's a good
Really
way to
good time.
describe it.
Yeah.
Totally has been. It's been a crazy week. We had all-time highs. We've had
Yeah.
a bunch of different cool stuff going on. Um, so tell me about you. What brought you here today? Tell me about Eco.
Yeah, Eco, most simply, Eco's focused on stablecoin user experience. Okay. That's what brings me here today. It's a good year to be building in stables. We've kind of always been in the stablecoin space. We think that's the easiest way to get people's money on chain and then show them what they can do beyond that. We've come at that over the years from a couple different angles. We built a consumer app in the US for a couple years that did really well, but ultimately we discovered that the infrastructure we built underneath that app to move stables really seamlessly is something that other builders wanted. And we've spent this year making that more powerful. And so we come at this from a user experience standpoint. I think that's kind of our edge. Our edge is we cannot think about infrastructure and user experience as separate things. They are two sides of the same coin. And we've spent a few years at the app layer, and that's taught us a lot. So the thesis is that the average user, any on-chain action or most on-chain action should be a simple stable send, right? You can do whatever else you want, but your ticket to ride on-chain is no longer native assets. It's very simply stablecoins, which is great for a new user because you can kind of intuit a stablecoin a lot easier. Okay, so if any on-chain action should basically be a one-click stable send, how do you make that work? Well, you need sort of like this really kind of broad interoperable network of stablecoins, kind of interconnected. You need liquidity routes for them. You need a really intuitive kind of one-click user experience that's way more minimal than a traditional wallet interface. And you need a really good way to manage liquidity within that network. And so Eco is that network, basically, making stablecoins flow way more freely along high demand liquidity routes, ensuring that there's a standardized user experience for sending them and hooking them into whatever app you want to use or whatever you then want to do with your crypto, and managing liquidity in between.
Can you
That's
talk about some of the some of the things you are integrated with or some success stories you've seen?
totally. I think let's just break it down kind of into those pieces. We have right now two features in beta called routes and accounts. Okay. And routes are just those liquidity routes. And where we see a lot of demand for those today is new app chains. So a new app chain stands up in whatever ecosystem it's in. We're sort of been in the Ethereum ecosystem for a while, so we're mostly focused on EVM app chains. Those are L2s, L3s, gaming chains, DeFi chains, whatever it may be. There's a new one rolling every week at least. And they need to get liquidity for some reason. Either they want people to deposit liquidity into their chain, or they very simply need people to be able to easily access their app, play their game, whatever it may be, even if it's not intended to be like a TVL deposit. And the simplest thing that they can do is say that I want to accept stablecoins from any connected chain across Ethereum. I want it in USDC, for example, and I don't care where it's coming from or what asset the user began with. Just sort of multi-settle it into one place for me as USDC, then we can hook it into whatever the user wants to do. And so we've seen a lot of demand for new app chain builders and app builders to stand up those routes really easily. Now, there are other ways they could do that. You could integrate a bridge, etc., but that comes with some overhead on the infra side. It comes with some overhead on the liquidity provisioning side. We make it very easy to just opt into that when you stand up your rollup, and we tend to work with kind of rollup service providers to make that an option when you roll your new chain. So if you're a developer, there's no infra overhead to saying, I want to accept stables from a bunch of different directions. You can just opt into your assets, opt into your routes, and we roll up kind of the infra and the liquidity on demand. So those are routes, and it's pretty simple, just extending stablecoin liquidity to these long tails of new apps and new chains. But there's really high demand for it. And then, okay, what are accounts? Once you have a bunch of new liquidity routes set up, we want to basically standardize the user experience for how you send stables across them. And accounts, you can think about as sort of a minimal single sign-on type of experience. All right, I'm using the Eco network. I want to opt into an Eco account. That means regardless of where my stables are or what my stable basket might be, I just have spending power within that network. And I can click send 10 if that's the price of what I'm trying to do. And I don't have to care in the background. Some logic pulls from wherever I have the adequate balance, swaps it if necessary, routes it to sort of the end state. And that becomes pretty powerful as you have more routes. You get sort of like this very simplistic one-click StableSend type of experience across any connected app or app chain. And once we get volume kind of like flowing more broadly through those two things, I think we'll understand where users are incurring slippage in user experience or maybe even in price. And we'll start to optimize kind of the way we manage liquidity within the entire thing. And that looks a lot more like a traditional new crypto network launch.
What would you say, in your opinion, is like the best stablecoin?
I'm pretty agnostic to it, to be honest with you.
Okay.
So, I mean, it just depends on your perspective, right? Like I can answer that somewhat diplomatically, depending on what your constraints are. And so I think, today USDC has an edge for the average new user. And it's just kind of like boring in the right way, safe, institutional
Says
backing is good.
USD.
Yeah. Institutional backing is good. I'm not saying it's the best per se. I think it introduces some points of failure into, with the way it's managed, but I'm very high confidence in it. It's the most intuitive to the average new user.
And yeah, you trust Coinbase, right?
Totally.
So,
But it doesn't pay yield. And so then you have this field of new opportunities for new stables to roll, some of which are extremely interesting. Obviously, sort of Athena set a high floor for itself. It's sort of got stable or staying power, I should say. And I'm pretty excited to see some of those new ones roll as well. We're like, stablecoins were dead for like 2 years post-Terra. Now we're like back to stablecoin wars. And I think it's good. I think that on-chain money experimentation is like the ethos of crypto, what crypto makes possible, and I think it's good. So I don't know about a best. I don't like superlatives in that regard, but I will say
it's a tricky question.
It's a tricky question.
It's supposed to, yeah.
The average new user probably most comfortable, like the shortest psychological hop for them is going to be USDC today. That's what we see.
That makes a lot of sense. Where are you? So you mentioned some different protocols that are like yield and sort of that. Like how would you work with them? I mean, in say I have an account, like am I getting yield on my stables then? Like regardless of what I hold, like ideally, is that sort of how it would work?
So there's a couple ways. We don't enable that today. It's just like I want to send my stables point A to point B with the simplest possible interaction, right? So that's great for the end user. They don't have to worry about on-chain overhead. It's great for the developer because that's higher conversion for them. They're not losing people trying to send stables into their app because of some complexity in the UX. That's what it is today. But ultimately, this is you're asking sort of the right question for where this goes. When I talk about you get volume flowing and then you sort of build the network to manage the liquidity and optimize the liquidity in between. That's when you have sort of like a bunch of like passive balances in the network, right? You deposit it into an app or you're sitting on maybe some spending power balance in your account. And that's when you want to activate that. There's a couple ways to do that. One is to allow people to default to a yield-bearing stable. That's interesting from also a go-to-market perspective because you can go to a lot of these newer stables, right?
Please.
And have them compete. Yeah, have them compete in this network, which I think is a good thing. I don't think you want to go to like, any $1 million market cap stable, but once they get to 50, 75, 100, right? And there's a bunch of mid caps kind of progressing through that range right now. You probably have a competitive field of 10 to 20 new stables. It's pretty interesting.
That is interesting. That's a big field.
It is a big field, and they'll pay. They'll pay the end user to get that access. And I think that there's another thing that sort of our dream end state is to activate a lot of that liquidity to basically solve the transaction demand of other users in the network. So our liquidity routes are intent-based liquidity routes. You say, I want to send 10 to chain X. I don't have a balance on chain X. Some other liquidity provider is watching the network and provides 10 on chain X. Okay? Various protocols do this today. We work together with some of them to try to make that a more efficient model. What becomes very interesting is the person who fills that order today tends to be an off-chain liquidity provider, highly sophisticated market maker. That's good. They can sort of manage the infra to make that efficient. But in my opinion, what becomes extremely interesting is if you have enough nascent capital on-chain to make it competitive with the off-chain capital that's trying to fill these orders. So if you have a bunch of users that are on chain X that already have the 10, you can now tap that liquidity to enable them to basically opt into filling that order. And the yield profile of that is pretty interesting. It starts to get pretty juicy in a pretty safe way. So if I'm just holding a passive balance on a destination that other people are wanting to get into, I can opt in to sort of making my balance available to solve for their orders coming in. You do that with enough volume, even at low order amounts, low dollar amounts, it starts to accrue to pretty nice yield for an end user.
It's kind of how banks work almost.
It's like crowd, we call it crowd liquidity,
Yeah.
basically. And I think that the more you bring kind of like that, what do I want to say, capital competition on chain, in my opinion, the more that you allow the average end user to also participate in it without this like high hurdle of sophistication for managing your infra, I think ultimately the better execution the end user gets, because it's just sort of competing to give them the best possible price for their send.
Makes sense. So you talked about accounts and routes, and I'm thinking like where are you seeing the most routes plug into? Like where are those high volume corridors, if you can say?
Yeah, I mean, basically uh, any new app or app chain is effectively trying to pull stablecoins from the usual suspects, where there's high kind of TVL just sitting there. So that's, it's obviously mainnet, but interestingly enough, not as much as you would think, because there's not like a ton of new users trying to play a game that are already holding capital on mainnet. Base is is a popular source chain because a lot of new people can easily hop on chain in Base, get USDC, and a lot of these apps are being built on Base anyway, or considering it. And so we see Base be sort of like a strong source, saying hey, that's that's where a lot of our potential users are. That's where they're holding their balance. That's where we want to sort of set up a route to go between, so they can come to our app and go back to Base super easily. And depending on how kind of like degen or crypto native the new application might be, there's still a fair amount of TVL kind of locked into the L2s that rolled earlier this year with the blasts, et cetera, that like did really successful liquidity campaigns. A lot of that liquidity has left the chain, but some is still sitting there. And interestingly enough, we're seeing some demand to try to like pull liquidity there if it's just like purely passive. That depends on what the app's reason for being is and what their user target is. But if the user target is sort of the crypto crowd that tends to take advantage of new incentives, a bunch of them kind of like left money on the L2s that rolled in the first half of the year, and that would be kind of like an opportunistic pull to try to get them move from.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Can you talk about sort of where you are, you think, in the journey of the company now? Like, like how long, like how old is it? Where do you see it going in the next couple of years?
Yeah.
Where are we in kind of the path?
Oh man, we've had such an interesting journey. So something that with this new network, it's like it is day one. We started building this new network at the beginning of this year, kind of iterating our way through, and a bunch of apps were asking us for this functionality, and we thought there's something here, and it's going to be a year for stablecoins, and we were kind of right about that. So this is a new network and a new protocol, but the company itself is 6 years old. Most people don't realize that. We kind of came of age in the like 2018 era San Francisco crypto scene, like this sort of like when people were rolling kind of algo stables in those early days, the payment focused projects. I think we were all overly optimistic about the readiness of the infra at the time and the readiness of the world to like hop into an algorithmic coin.
Yeah, well,
right.
We had Terra too.
Totally.
Yeah.
And we were kind of like from that similar era. A lot of projects focused on, well, crypto payments is inevitable. Okay, let's also do like an on-chain native currency within those payment networks. Haven was doing that as well, ultimately turned into synthetics. We were kind of from that early tree. And then ultimately, though, we thought in the early days the wallets are going to bring the end users. And then after working on it for 2 years, we realized not only is the infra not ready yet, it's all mainnet still, but the wallets aren't bringing the end users. They're bringing like crypto people, but they're not bringing crypto people to use stables and like pay. And so we built a consumer app for 3 years in the US that just did a simple thing. It asked people to hold their money in USDC, give them better yield and better cash back at a lot of places they cared about. And it was really powerful. It did really, really well for the first couple of years. And obviously we just wanted to give them a custodial USDC experience, literally just hold your dollars here instead of there, and then progressively show them more that they could do on chain. The problem with that app is it was a custodial app in the United States. It became extremely difficult to build that app in 2023 as sort of we were relying on 4 or 5 banking partners in a pretty sophisticated way to move money. It was a compliant app. MSB had money transmission licenses, but it became difficult still to work with our banking partners to move people in and out of stables. As boring and simple as that may seem, it became a pretty restrictive environment. And so we're an American
company too, so I understand.
Yeah.
It's not, not fun always. They don't. Hopefully, it's getting better. I think it's
Yeah.
about to get a lot better.
I think it is, but that was our experience, and so that's why we've been around for a while. We built a couple early successes, and we wound that app down because it was just the writing was on the wall. We were not going to be able to take people on chain, and our banks were telling us in the background, if you try to take people on chain, we can't serve you anymore. And that meant they couldn't get money in the app or out of the app, right? And that's like the fundamental trust equation for the product we were building. So we wound it down, but we had built the early version of what we're building now for the future that never came for that product, was when we merged the product on chain. And we built a couple demo applications on top of that infra in the early account abstraction days, and some people noticed them, and a bunch of projects started coming to us asking how we were able to expose that user experience, how we were thinking about stablecoin routing. And it gave us all the validation we needed to kind of go back on chain and go back to the infra layer after spending 3 years at the app layer. And a lot of people don't know that sort of untold history about Eco in terms of how long we've been around and kind of how we've iterated our way here. But that's how we arrived.
No, I love that, and I think it really is a journey, and I think a lot of people just see it as like overnight success. They don't know the kind of the trials of being a founder or the different things you go through.
Totally.
So I think that's fascinating. Kind of just as a closing, how I mean, we talked about this before we started, but like, was the Bangkok experience good? What was kind of the goal for the team being here?
Dude, it was so much fun. It was chaos, but we knew that was going to be the case coming in, like in a good way. So much fun. I cannot believe how far Devcon is it has come. Just the energy around it, the builder energy this year. We're in a good market, but most of the noise is good noise right now because there's so many legitimate projects rolling their infra that we've been waiting for a couple years at least to use.
Feels real, actually.
It feels real.
Yeah.
And there's a stamp of legitimacy around the entire thing. So it's been really fun. We didn't have the whole team here. We had 4 people here hustling, kind of like build-focused partnerships. So a lot of design sessions with 3 or 4, really 4 or 5 other projects that we're working pretty closely with. A lot of whiteboarding, a lot of plotting about going to market. We supported a couple demos. Hyperlane did a demo that we were pretty excited about that was kind of built on something that we developed. We built it together. So we were supporting them at their side events. And just making sure that we have like a locked-in go-to-market roadmap with our key partners over the course of the next 2-3 months. We wanted that FaceTime with them. We knew everyone would be here, and so that's what we focused on this week.
Awesome. Well, I highly encourage all of you to follow Eco. Ryne's doing an amazing job, and I think the whole team is really on the right path here. Stables are the future. And I mean, honestly, I know we're in Asia and I'm super bullish on crypto anywhere, but it is always super cool to see the innovation coming out of the US because, it's like, we all told us, everyone said crypto is dead in America. It's not dead in America. It's coming back. There's a lot of good entrepreneurs in the US. So, that always makes me super happy to see.
100%. 100%. Here to stay. It's inevitable.
Yep. Thank you. Cheers.
Hey, what's up?
This is
But it's
Saxe.
not something Genzio is afraid of.
If you want to survive, you got to build a
How
hive.
many know who do not understand that we need not
Ladies and gentlemen,
We're back at the Genzio Media House.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining us today.